Hello and a very warm welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching The Big Picture with me, Frank Pereira. Prime Minister Narendra Modi on Thursday arrived in Bishkek, the Kyrgyz capital, for the Shanghai Cooperation Organisation Summit. He met Chinese President Xi Jinping, Afghanistan President Ashraf Ghani and Russian President Vladimir Putin on the sidelines of the SCO Summit to further strengthen bilateral relations. Amid frosty relations, no pleasantries were exchanged between Prime Minister Modi and Pakistan Prime Minister Imran Khan. This comes as India clarified that there would be no bilateral meeting between the two leaders. PM Modi held his first meeting with Chinese President Xi Jinping to discuss ways to further strengthen the bilateral relations between the two countries. He termed the meeting as extremely fruitful. PM Modi also held a meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin and said that it was excellent. Apart from these two meetings, he also met the President of Afghanistan and the heads of the other member states. On this edition of The Big Picture, we will analyze India at the 2019 SCO Summit. Joining me on the program today are Arvind Gupta, Director, Vivekananda International Foundation, Ashok Sajanhar, former Ambassador, and Pramit Pal Chaudhary, Foreign Affairs Editor of the Hindustan Times. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of The Big Picture. Mr. Gupta, I'd like to begin with you. Takeaways really for you as far as India at SCO 2019?
Prime Minister Modi made a very good speech, and I think it was a very constructive speech. And he followed on the speech that he had made last year at Qingdao. There he had given a acronym called SECURE, which basically underlined some of the points for cooperation, including economic cooperation, etc. And this year he has come up with another very innovative acronym called HEALTH. And health is very interesting because it brings together, I think, the Indian experience in development and India's experience in engagement with other countries. And this experience he brings to the table at the SCO. And I think that would be something that is that would be of some interest to other members of the SCO. So it was a very positive and constructive suggestions that he made. But apart from that, he also discussed, as was expected, the issue of terrorism. And there, without naming any country, he said that those who promote terrorism, fund terrorism, etc., there should be an action against them. So that is one. And the second thing, he also called for an international conference on terrorism and felt that SCO could take a lead in that. And then, of course, there were other usual points about the importance of SCO, etc., which are quite standard. But I think the takeaway here is that India, which is now a full member of the SCO, is coming up with something positive on bringing something positive to the SCO platform. There are many people who have been asking questions for the last several years that India and Pakistan are joining SCO together. Will their bilateral issues be somehow cloud the SCO? And by the way, that danger is not totally gone away because on the sidelines of the SCO, these things can happen. But at the same time, most countries have also felt that India, with its very good record of economic growth and of handling problems which afflict the other countries also, its experience should be shared. So I think that is something that he would bring in. Another very interesting point is that, which I think he did at Qingdao as well as here, he is also trying to establish the historical connect between India and the SCO region. And which is often forgotten or is being hijacked just in that narrow concept of Silk Road, etc. But actually the links between India and SCO region have been very old, ancient, right. And I think these need to be highlighted.
Sure.
So that's what he did in his speech.
Yes. So before we get to the the bilaterals on the sidelines, let's talk about some of the highlights really as far as the SCO Summit are concerned. Ambassador, your highlights?
Yeah, I think in addition to terrorism, and it was not only the issue of terrorism that he focused on, I think radicalization is something that he specifically spoke about. Because, when he gave this acronym, the T stands for, countries standing against terrorism. And radicalization is an issue which bedevils the Central Asian region in a very, very big way. For instance, if you were to see the total population of the 5 countries, out of these 5, only 4 are members of SCO. Turkmenistan is not, but out of the 5 countries, the total population would be in the range of 62 to 65 million people. And out of that, we have more than 15,000 young men and women who have gone to Syria and Iraq to fight on the side of the Islamic State. And once, Islamic State gets defeated there, these people are coming back. So that creates a problem, a huge problem. And of course, India has great strengths as far as, dealing with this whole issue of radicalization is concerned, dealing with the issue of terrorism is concerned in terms of intelligence sharing. He spoke about the cooperation with the regional anti-terrorist terrorism structure that is based in Tashkent. So I think that he gave a fuller treatment as to what the countries need to do to work together. This was the message also that he gave when he spoke in Maldives at the Maldivian parliament, basically saying that it is not a challenge that a single country faces. It is a challenge that is faced by the whole international community, by the whole civilization. So all of us have to get together. So terrorism was a strong message. The other strong message, something that is very clear, close to the heart of Prime Minister Modi, is of environmental protection. And in his health acronym, the second E refers to promotion of A is alternative energy. And there he speaks also about India's experience in terms of focusing on renewable energy. And the other aspect that he made basically on regional cooperation is that how India is willing to share its expertise in all these areas. So I think by and large, even if you were not to look at currently at the bilateral meetings that he had, I think his speech on this issue, his focus also on Afghanistan, because that is something that is very, very significant. Although Afghanistan is not a member of SCO, but we have a contact group on Afghanistan, and the Prime Minister underlined what India's fundamental position on this is. And the final point that I would say is SCO provides an opportunity to India, to the Indian leadership, to connect with the leadership of the Central Asian countries. And that is a very big takeaway from here, because India gets an opportunity to meet leaders of Russia, of China, but we do not get such opportunities. So like he met all the leaders in Qingdao, so he'll meet all the 4 leaders of Central Asia at Bishkek, and that will be helpful in advancing our bilateral ties as also ties with the region.
Absolutely. Talking about bilateral ties, let's look at some of the bilaterals that Prime Minister Modi had. The first one being with Xi Jinping, the President of China. Correct. Were you surprised at all, Pramit, as far as that meeting was concerned, with Xi Jinping bringing up the whole Pakistan issue and talking to Prime Minister Modi about that?
Yes, that was a surprise in the sense that normally at that level the agenda is more or less set. And by then it would have been almost clear to the Chinese, or should have been clear, that India would reject such a proposal as long as Pakistan continued to sponsor terrorism. And given that we've just had more terrorist incidents in Kashmir and elsewhere, she must have known already by then that India's response would be relatively negative. So it was a surprise that he did raise it, and it would seem to indicate, at least to me, that China is nervous about what Pakistan's present condition is. And when I mean that, I mean, one, the economy of Pakistan, which is shriveling even as we speak. Bangladesh, if it already has not, will in a few months overtake Pakistan in terms of GDP. Or if you want to put it another way, the state of Maharashtra by itself is 30% wealthier now in dollar terms than Pakistan, the entire nation of Pakistan. I think the Chinese are also nervous that the fact there is now roughly 20 to 30,000 Chinese who have now taken up residency in Pakistan, about half of them involved with the China-Pakistan economic corridor, and they have been attacked by Baluch rebels, and they would almost certainly be caught in the wheels of any any conflict between India and Pakistan. And finally, that Pakistan itself is now being caught up in the larger US-China conflict. And we saw in the IMF, America using Pakistan, hitting Pakistan in an attempt to essentially hit China. So I think put all of this together for Xi Jinping, China has assumed the role of being the patron of Pakistan. 70% of their weapons, the bulk of their investment. They are the big they're bailout funders of Pakistan whenever they have an economic crisis, and definitely their main diplomatic guardian in the United Nations and elsewhere when we go after the Pakistanis. But this is a problem child, and I think for them, for Xi at least, I think a certain degree of desperation that at least on one element of his Pakistan headache, if you wish, is that he would like the relationship between India and Pakistan to at least be stable.
Right.
And perhaps that's what drove him to at least raise this issue, as I said, surprisingly, at the highest level.
Right. Mr. Gupta, talking about Pakistan being a problem child, even Prime Minister Modi brought up this issue with Xi Jinping about how Pakistan-sponsored terrorism is really a problem. But how far can we expect the Chinese to go to try and rein in Pakistan?
Not very far. I think we should realize that SCO is also trying to develop an identity for itself. And every country, at least the big countries in the SCO, they have their own agendas for which they use the SCO for. SCO, as you know, came up in the mid-90s, mostly at the Chinese behest. It has developed, and today China is the biggest investor in the SCO in Central Asian countries, biggest trading partner, and Pakistan is very important for China because of the China-Pakistan economic corridor. So China has much larger interests. The other thing that is happening is that the SCO is also seen by Russia and China as an alternative pole in a multipolar world, which means it should heft like other regional organizations. That's why you see in this Bishkek declaration also SCO signing several MOUs and cooperations, etc., with UN organizations and so on and so forth. And the ambitions of some of these Pakistan, Kyrgyzstan and some other countries is mentioned that they want to join the Human Rights Council, which is basically saying that these memberships should be supported. So I think there is a bigger game at play here, and SCO is being used by China as an instrument for enhancing its influence, and this is really the backer. If you look at Russia, Russia of course goes along with the SCO, but Russia also is aware that China is really the most dominant player and actor, simply because it has more money and more involvement in investment, trade, etc. So there is a mention in the Bishkek Summit about aligning the projects of Eurasian Economic Union, which is a Russia dominated or Russia sponsored project, with that of the SCO. So and also, since it's an alternative pole, there's also some hint here and there that which is that in the trade area, in the area of trade, the protectionism, etc., is being criticized, which is really a hint at the Americans. So I think this has had an anti-American slant since the beginning. So I think if this is the game, that is, if SCO is an instrument in the hands of the Chinese, obviously Pakistan is very important for China. So this kind of a thing won't happen. And China pressurizing Pakistan on some of the issues which are of concern to India, I don't think we should pin much hope on that.
Okay. Moving on now and moving forward, Ambassador, both leaders, Xi and Modi, have agreed to expedite the dialogue on the India-China boundary issue now for securing a fair solution, is what they have called it. So what is that fair solution really going to be?
I think this must have really come in passing as far as the bilateral discussions were concerned, I would not think that too much of time would have been spent on this, because both the leaders, starting in 2005, they have appointed these special representatives. They have been meeting they've already met 21 times, so discussions have been going on. So I do, there have been some markers on the road, like in 2005, we had these agreement on guidelines and principles on the basis of which fair boundary solution would be made. Then later on, there were also border peace maintaining committee. So there have been some markers there. I don't think that too much of time really would have been spent on this particular issue, because there have been sort of other issues in terms of trade deficit, trade issues. I'm sure that has come up, that would have come up in a bigger way, because India suffers this huge trade deficit with China. And of course, there has been a discussion on Pakistan, I'm sure, on basically focus would have been on the positives. This is the first meeting that is taking place between the two leaders after they met in Buenos Aires in G20, on the sidelines of the G20. And again, they are going to be meeting in Osaka later this month. And they said, all the three leaders, that is what they had decided even at that time, that multilateral summits, the three leaders will take out time to sort of get together. And then also, I'm sure much time would have been spent on Wuhan too, that we saw how after Doklam we were able to sort of both the sides were able to at least make an attempt at normalization of the relations. And I think over the last, since April 2018, when that meeting took place, till now, the relations have stayed by and large calm and without any major hiccups,
right,
particularly on the border. So I think what is to be expected in Wuhan too. So I think those would have been really more of the issues that would have come up for discussion, rather than
the focus areas.
Yes, focus areas, rather than on the border as such. Yeah.
Okay. Pramit Pal Chaudhary, as far as the positives are concerned, and as far as looking ahead, Xi Jinping said something very interesting. He said India and China do not pose a threat to each other. I'm going to go back to the point that you were making in your opening remark about how clearly the pressures, the tariff war, the issues with CPEC and other projects on the whole, these seem to be taking a toll on the Chinese administration.
I think yes. I think that's completely true. We saw India and China in the first 4 years of the Modi government squabble over the Dalai Lama succession, over the Belt Road Initiative, and then finally culminating in the Doklam military standoff. So during those first 4 years, we saw very little evidence that China was in any interest or any desire to come to any sort of real understanding with India in any way whatsoever. And we continue in many ways to fight, for example, if you wish, proxy wars in the Maldives and Sri Lanka, or proxy wars of influence, and so on. But after the Doklam standoff, Modi and Xi met at Xiamen, the BRICS summit, and then later that resulted in the Wuhan summit in April last year. But what was very clear was the Chinese signaled very clearly that they wanted to lower the temperature. They accepted that there was not going to be any quick solutions to things like the border, and fundamentally India and China will continue to spar, especially now in the Indian Ocean, for influence. But China indicated that it did not want to really get involved in more problems. And I should note that simultaneously the same policy was being enacted with Japan by the Chinese. So Shinzo Abe, for example, for the first time has been allowed to visit land on Chinese soil and hold a state visit there, which until now is strictly banned from doing by the Chinese. All of this indicates, and to some lesser extent this is even true in places like South Korea, even with the Southeast Asians over the South China Sea, we've seen at least a slightly more moderate language coming out of Beijing. All of this seems to indicate that China is now completely and increasingly focused on the fact that their relationship with the United States, which is the only country they see as a peer nation and one that could theoretically threaten them, is deteriorating quite rapidly. When I've been to Beijing, it's been struck by the fact that how surprised they have been by the Trump administration. They did not believe Trump would impose tariffs. They thought they had a trade deal with President Trump. And each and every way, the American system has surprised them, and always on the negative side. And their view is basically that we must focus on only one point of confrontation. And if it's the United States, we have to therefore have a relatively peaceful environment in all of the other areas around us.
Right.
And I think that's exactly what we're going to see here. And we saw when Modi was re-elected, the Chinese were the second fastest country to phone up and send a message to congratulate him, and very quickly send a message they would like Xi and Modi to meet again. We're now seeing the dates probably in October for a follow-up to Wuhan, and that the spirit of Wuhan should be maintained at all costs.
Right. Let's look at the other important bilateral that took place on the sidelines of the SCO. Now, that with the Russian President Vladimir Putin. So, Mr. Gupta, a lot of the focus in recent times as far as India's foreign policy has been centered around the US, China, what's happening in the Strait of Hormuz and Iran, because oil directly has an impact on India. But Russia at the end of the day is a strategic partner and a very important partner, and it was very clearly seen when both Prime Minister Modi and Putin met.
I'll come to Russia, but if you allow me just a sentence on the border. Actually, I was quite surprised that this border thing came up, and it was mentioned by, I think, the Foreign Secretary when he gave that briefing. I would see it as a indication that India wants the border to be taken seriously. Chinese do it or no, that's a different matter. But there's something now with Mr. Modi having come back with a massive mandate, and this is one issue which really bedevils the Sino-Indian relations. And if this were out of the way, things would improve between India and China. So I wouldn't be surprised that if there is a fresh movement towards discussion of the border issue, because in the last few rounds of the special representative talks, it has not really, nothing much has happened. So maybe it's a move on the part of India to revive. Because the word that was used is expediting discussions.
Yes.
I think that is the word. So we'll have to watch how this goes, because this is the time when China is under pressure. So they want to improve relations with India. So India should also think of its own interests. So I think I see it in that context. Coming back to Russia, as Ashok said, I think SCO Forum provides yet another opportunity for a discussion with many leaders. And Russia is certainly very, very important. And if you saw the body language, here again the chemistry was more important than the arithmetic of meeting how many leaders you had met. So it's very important that we should revive our flagging relationship with Russia, and which has also come under pressure because of the American policies on CATSA sanctions and also in Iran, etc. How it is to be done, that is of course the challenge for diplomacy, but Russia remains very important, and Russia itself is also looking at the Far East and Asia Pacific, they still call it, but basically Indo-Pacific, quite carefully. And the invitation to the Prime Minister to visit Vladivostok for Eastern Economic Forum is a very good opening that India is getting. Because as you know, Far East and Siberia and north of Russia are rich in minerals and so on. And Russians had been telling us to look at that region. So if we can work out something with Russia, so this will be a new impetus for Indo-Russian relations. Right. I think his visit to Vladivostok will be very important. So this will also give a fresh momentum to Indo-Russian relations, and that will also add a certain balance to our foreign policy.
Sure. Ambassador, talking about Vladivostok and Prime Minister Narendra Modi's invite now as the main guest for the Eastern Economic Forum. Yes. So that clearly shows that Prime Minister Modi's as well as India's stock has gone up globally.
No, definitely, and I would say that over the last 5 years, I would say that the
And
prestige
if I,
cloud
if I
profile,
may just add, G7 as well.
G7 also at Biarritz in August. Yes, I would say that over the last 5 years it has gone up. But after the huge mandate that the Prime Minister has got and the party has got, I think in terms of stature, it has gone up even further. So when the Prime Minister goes to any international or global or multilateral fora, he and India's position will be listened to with much greater respect. So that definitely goes without saying. But let me also add, as far as Russia is concerned, another important aspect is that there was always this feeling that India is veering towards America, towards the United States. So our relations with Russia have not been doing as well. After all, that's a trusted friend and partner. But two things. One is the fact that the highest award was given by Russia to the Prime Minister even before the results of the elections were out, even during the course of the elections. So I think that really speaks, it sends out a very strong message that Russia feels that Prime Minister Modi has individually, in his own way, contributed significantly to expanding the relations. Of course, we also need to remember that 2 years ago in 2017 June, Prime Minister Modi was invited as the chief guest at St. Petersburg International Economic Forum. That was also an extremely important invite. The second point I want to make here is that India has been invited by Russia to come and explore the Arctic with
Yes.
it, and that is very important in my view, because again, as Arvind said, that the whole of Siberian region and eastern region is full of minerals, but even more than that is the Arctic region, oil, gas and other minerals.
Right.
So that is also, I think, very, very significant in terms of taking, and Russians would have gained heart from the fact that while we have tended to go along with the US sanctions on Iran, but we have stood very firm on S-400, and that
absolutely.
is a message that we have sent out, a clear message to the United States.
Sure.
If you permit, I'll just say one sentence about India, Pakistan in the SCO, because let's also not forget that in 2015, when both Prime Minister Modi and Nawaz Sharif met in Ufa in Russia and Bashkortostan,
Right.
that was the time when we decided that we will have a bilateral dialogue on terrorism. And when Nawaz Sharif went back, of course, he was not able to take that forward. And the point I'm making is that the SCO forum can be used, by India. Right now, we have given out this message, a very clear message: no talks. Still, any concrete action is taken by Pakistan. But otherwise, under other circumstances, the same forum can be used to take our relationships in whichever way we want to.
Absolutely. All right. Quick closing comment from you, Pramit. Before I wrap up the program, we've spoken about China, we've spoken about Russia. Let's not forget, all three heads of state are going to meet very soon in Osaka, Japan. What can we expect there?
Well, I think the big question in the G20, which is largely about economics, will be that there is clearly a global slowdown in the economy, partly driven by the increasing problems that are spreading because of the US-China trade war. India will be very focused on selling itself. Our economy is also slowing down, and we need very large infusions of foreign capital because our own credit flow cycle is jammed up. And as has been mentioned earlier, Modi will be one of the few world leaders there who will be holding an enormous political mandate. Most other world leaders are in very shaky shape right now. So he needs to leverage that I have this mandate, I have the ability to carry out reforms, I am the country you should be looking at investing in. And I think that will be the primary message we will be trying to send out at G20 and at the G7 and various other fora.
All right. On that note, then, we'll call it a wrap on this edition of The Big Picture. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. That's it from me. See you again next time.